Welcome back, everybody. Thank you guys for joining me for some crime and some cocktails. So today's drink is going to be a little bit more fun. Since it's Halloween season, I wanted to do something aesthetically pleasing for the October month. What you're going to need for this drink tonight: some sherbet ice cream, vodka. Once again, Jared gets another gigantic drink, but I use Sprite Zero, some green dye, and of course, you know me, I love my lime, so I brought some extra limes to put in my drink. So let's start. I'm stepping up my game just a little bit since I don't have, oh, there's a hair. Since I don't have a cocktail shaker, I have a protein shaker, so I think that'll do for today. All right, Megan, don't pour too much vodka because you guys know I always do. Ooh, I think that's enough, right? I don't know. If it's not strong enough, I'll add some more. But the last drink, a funny story. I mean, it looked kind of swampy. If you guys remember, I was very unhappy with how it turned out look-wise. But I mean, it tasted good, but it probably tasted good because I poured way too much vodka. And I went to the park afterward and I was just done. So I don't want to do that tonight because it's a school night. All right, so after that, let's take some ice cream. It's really hot in here, so I hope it hasn't melted. Okay. I'm going to scoop some of the green ice cream, put some in there. You know what? You got to work with what you have. All right, some nice green sherbet ice cream. So good. And I'm just going to pour a little bit of the soda right now, otherwise it's going to explode when I shake it. Ooh, let's see if I can do this on camera. Just a little bit. We're definitely going to add some more at the end. I know some people would like to add like some pineapple juice to this, but I'm not really feeling the pineapple, so I'm just going to add some extra lime juice in there. And then to brighten up the color, I actually got some food coloring or some drops. All right. Of course, I'm wearing a white shirt when I'm making a colorful drink. Ooh, look at that. Pour it on in. Ooh, very spooky. I'm gonna try it before adding Sprite. Definitely need more Sprite. So right now, if you guys have seen my Instagram, I film in my storage unit and it's later than I usually make these videos, so I'm a little scared. Ooh. All right, and there it is. Nice, bright green drink, perfect for Halloween. Now this tastes good. It's a sherbet vodka soda. A better vodka soda than last week, for sure. So the reason I made this drink today is because the story we're going to talk about in this video is out of this world, literally. We're going to be talking about aliens or the possibility of other living things out there in our universe. So I thought this was fitting. Okay, I need to put it down or I'm going to drink the whole damn thing. So whether you are a believer of life outside of our planet or you're a skeptic, I believe this story is one worth hearing. The case we're going to talk about today is pretty extraordinary. It's about a man who had claimed to have been abducted by aliens for 5 days. He's written a book that was turned into a movie. He recently did an interview with Joe Rogan on his podcast at the beginning of the year. And also this year, a documentary about, his life and what he went through has came out. And that's where I got most of my information from today. It's really good. It's on Amazon Prime. It's free. When you're done with this, I'm going to try to leave the links below so you can watch those, especially Joe Rogan's podcast. He talks about other occurrences in his life, and it's really amazing. So it's easy to dismiss a person that makes a claim about being abducted by aliens. But how do you discredit 6 eyewitnesses? Yes, I said it. 6 other people other than the man who was abducted. I cannot say the word abducted. 6 other people were at the scene when this UFO appeared in the sky and took their friend. There was even physical evidence to prove that some kind of occurrence had happened at this night that he said he was taken by a UFO. And almost 46 years later to the day, everyone's story has stayed the same. Everyone's been pretty consistent with it. Today, we're going to talk about the abduction of Travis Walton. Travis Walton was a 22-year-old logger who lived in Snowflake, Arizona, which was a pretty small town where everybody knew everybody. He seemed to be known as kind of a rebellious individual and an adrenaline junkie. He was adventurous. He had been working under his best friend Mike Rogers for the last decade. And at the beginning of November 1975, Mike hired Travis and a few other men to work in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest to cut down about 1,200 acres of trees that were damaged to prevent forest fires. These other men were John Gillette, Ken Peterson, Alan Dallas, Dwayne Smith, and Steve Pierce, who was the youngest at just 17 years old. And this was a tough and dangerous job. They didn't have this large machinery or equipment to help them. They literally had chainsaws and axes. So Mike wanted to hire men that were tough and level-headed. So our story begins on November 5th, 1975. Mike and his crew were actually running behind schedule. So the days they were working under this contract, they were very long, very exhausting, with very little breaks. And as the sun starts setting, they pack up all their stuff and they all pile into Mike's truck to head back down the mountain to go home for the night. It wasn't very long into their drive where they noticed to their right there's just a bright golden light peeking through the trees, and it was so bright that it leaked onto the road right in front of them. At first, they thought it could be someone camping out in the woods. They thought it could be the moon, but they looked to their left and the moon was actually over there. So it wasn't the moon. They thought it could be some headlights, but whatever it was different. It didn't fit this environment. So the men decided to, check it out. There was a dirt path that led into a clearing and they were just curious. So when they drive about 30 feet off the road, they enter a clearing, and that is when they see something unbelievable and mind-boggling. About 25 feet above this clearing, they saw a UFO hovering in the air. It was bright. It was a disc-shaped UFO. And, they remember it clear as day because they said it was nice and sleek and it was just absolutely beautiful. They could not take their eyes off of it, especially Travis. Being the adrenaline junkie he wanted to get out and take as close of a look as possible. Travis quickly opened the door before it was even at a stop, and he ran out to get a closer look. He knew that this was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And as he started to get closer, he started getting a very eerie and unsettling feeling, but he didn't want to turn around and let the men down. He didn't want them to know that he was, a little bit scared, so he kept going. And he does say he would soon regret making that decision. The object began moving. This UFO started moving, making a really high-pitched sound, and then it started to make like a rumbling thunder kind of noise that everyone explains it was more than just hearing it in your ear. You could feel it in your body. Even Mike Rogers says that while he was in his truck, his hands were on the steering wheel and he could feel the rumble. So the men are screaming for Travis to get away. He's just in awe, but he realizes that he could be in a dangerous situation. So he tries to jump away to take cover. But when he attempted to take cover, he tried to hide behind a log, but it actually brought him forward and he was closer to the UFO. At this point, he's like, I gotta get up and I gotta run. My friends are yelling for me. This is crazy. So he gets up to run away, and guess what happens? Let me take a little sip. All of the men say this is when a bright green light struck Travis. This energy hit him in the head to his chest. He could just feel it like it was like lightning had struck him. The men recall seeing Travis's body elevate a few feet into the air and his whole body was stretched out. It was said that he went totally limp and it looked like he had no muscle in his body whatsoever. He just gets thrown to the floor and he lands on his right shoulder. One of the men shouts, "They got him." And as Travis lay there on the ground, everyone immediately assumed he was dead because he just looked lifeless. All the men went into a panic and Mike pushes on the gas and he just gets the heck out of there because they think that they are next. So they're driving crazy down the road. A few minutes pass and they realize the UFO is not following them like they thought it would. And Mike was Travis's friend. So there were two options. They could go back and save Travis while potentially risking their lives as well, or they could go get help. Because remember, this is the 70s. There are no cell phones. And, Mike, it's his friend that's out there. So he's like, the right thing to do is to go back and save Travis. And he says he was surprised all the men came with him. They were unarmed. They had nothing but a single flashlight. When they get back to the site, they're looking for Travis and he's gone. Like just vanished into thin air. It was basically like nothing had happened minutes earlier. So they head back down the mountain to call for help. And when they get to the nearest payphone, they call the Navajo Sheriff's Department. And they didn't tell them right away that their friend could have been taken by a UFO. Like that would have sounded crazy. But they said their friend was missing and they needed them to come right away. So the deputy shows up and instantly he notices the fear that is in these men's eyes. Their eyes are bloodshot. You could tell that they've been crying. This is something to make note of. These are really tough lumberjacks. They didn't have the personality of someone that, would be fearful or cry. They were definitely shooken up and the sheriff made note of that. So the deputy calls the sheriff Marlon Gillespie, I think that's his name. And the sheriff and a few of the men head back to the site where Travis disappeared. They go there and there's no evidence of Travis being there to begin with. There's no footprints. There's just nothing. The sheriff thinks, maybe these guys are on drugs, probably marijuana. Checks the truck, nothing in there. They're clean, they're good. And his only logical reason would be they murdered their crew member. And they came up with this elaborate story to cover their tracks. I feel like that's a pretty crazy story to come up with. Over the next few days, the search for Travis Walton included helicopters, men on horseback, volunteers, planes overhead, scent dogs, nothing. They couldn't find him. And this was a small town, Snowflake, so everybody knew everybody. With all of these people searching, they came up with nothing. It seemed like murder was the only reasonable explanation at this point. But these 6 men, they knew what they saw, but it didn't take long for them to realize that they were possibly going to be prosecuted for Travis's disappearance and most likely his murder because they could charge them for murder even without a body. They assumed that these loggers most likely hid his body under some trees and they knew the forest better than everyone, so that was just the conclusion in everyone's mind. For these 6 men, there was no proof of any kind of UFO. They were receiving harassment, and at times it was believed that the government was following them. This story about these lumberjacks seeing a UFO and their friend being abducted, you can imagine it got picked up nationally and internationally. The phones did not stop ringing, and this is stressing the sheriff department out. So they're like, let's cut through the bull crap and you guys are going to take a lie detector test. Now, the polygraph was, like it is today, still questionable, but in the late 70s, it was used quite often. The men agreed to take it even though it's not completely reliable because they just wanted to prove that they could not possibly murder their crew member, their friend. And they didn't take the lie detector test once. They took it multiple times. Each test was about 2 hours long where they repeated the same questions over and over and over. Were you there with Travis that night? Did you murder Travis? Did you really see a UFO? And guess what? All of the men passed. with flying colors. One test did come back inconclusive because Alan Dallas, he wasn't cooperating, and it was said that he left in the middle of the interview, but he does take the test again later and he passes it as well. Now, as we all know, a lie detector test is not accurate. It's said that someone who is an outstanding liar could produce a false truth, and someone telling the truth could produce a false lie. But polygraph experts say for at least 5 men to all be telling the same story, if they were all lying about it, that is a 1 in a million chance. It's nearly impossible for 5 people to pass a polygraph if they were lying. Now, this is the biggest piece of evidence that I just cannot get past. I mean, right here, this is proof that they did not murder their friend. They could not all be lying about the story and pass a polygraph saying they didn't murder their friend. You know, they all saw something that night, a UFO, or what they believed to be a UFO. Even though the men passed their polygraph test, people, especially in Snowflake, but everyone thought they were still lying. I mean, these were loggers. They knew the forest, so Travis's body could be hiding under some trees. Who knows? But to everyone's surprise, something unexpected happens. Travis Walton returns home. In the early hours of November 12th, 1975, Travis wakes up just laying on the pavement. It's dark and wet outside. He feels extremely weak and dehydrated. As he looks up from the ground, he believes he sees a spaceship just silently take off into the sky, but he can't be too sure because he's just so disoriented. He knows that he needs to find the strength to, get up and find some civilization around. He probably needs to get to a hospital at this point. So after running and stumbling down the road, Travis finds a rest stop that has a payphone, and he immediately calls his brother-in-law Grant. At first, when Grant answers the phone, he doesn't believe it's Travis, because Travis is supposed to be dead. His crew members had murdered him. So Travis convinces him, this is me, and he does not know what's going on. When his brother and brother-in-law arrive to pick him up at the payphone, they could tell that Travis is just so fragile. He has a 5-day growth beard. He looks like he lost some weight, which turns out he lost over 10 pounds. And he is just completely confused about what's going on. Travis thinks he had only been gone for like a couple minutes, hours at the most, but he had no idea that he had been gone for 5 days. I mean, 1 second he was struck by this sort of lightning that came from a UFO, and the next minute he's on the ground. Travis's brother knew that, the media would go crazy if they found out that Travis was home, and he didn't look like he was in any condition to talk to the police, so they decided to take him to a hospital in Phoenix, Arizona. Everyone knew who Travis was. It was all over the news. Even the doctors that were examining him knew. His brother asked if they could just keep it on the down low because we didn't want the media getting all crazy. They did a number of tests on Travis while he was at the hospital. Other than being dehydrated and incredibly weak, there were no injuries on him. No bruises, nothing even wrong with his shoulder that he had landed on. The only marking on his body was a puncture wound inside his elbow, like someone had stuck him with a needle, but there were no drugs in his system. He doesn't have a history of using any kind of drugs like that, so they have no idea where that came from. And at this point, Travis does not know what happened over those 5 days. He still can't believe he was gone for that long. And he says he feels really bad. He couldn't imagine, the pain that his mother had gone through during that time period. It didn't take long for people to find out that Travis was home and he actually wasn't murdered by his crew members. So Sheriff Gillespie decides to, take a trip and go see Travis at his brother's home. The sheriff says he remembers seeing Travis just in complete shock, and he didn't think he was faking it. And although this story about a UFO didn't make sense, the sheriff couldn't arrest him because no crime had really been committed, and there was no proof of any crime being committed. So he says, they'll keep in touch. When the public found out that Travis was home, everyone and their mom wanted to interview him. I mean, I would have wanted to interview him. There was a nationally known UFO organization in Tucson, Arizona, and they went by the name APRO. APRO reached out to Travis and offered a hypnosis session with Dr. James Harder so Travis could have a better recollection of his time missing. Now, this would be very helpful for Travis so he wasn't constantly living in fear of the unknown of what had happened to him because, before this, he didn't want to talk to anyone. And you would think someone that was faking this UFO story for fame, they would want to get their story out there. But Travis, he was scared. He was scared of his own mind, and he just hated not knowing what was really going on or what had happened. When he agreed to the hypnosis session and he was able to dive deep into his mind, this is when the story gets even crazier. Travis says after he was struck by that sort of lightning bolt from the UFO, he remembers waking up to a bright light in front of his face, like a hospital light. And he remembers seeing some people surrounding him, like they were working on him. He was in so much pain and had gotten hurt when he landed on his shoulder. So he thought, I got hurt, my crew members picked me up and sent me to a hospital. But when he's able to focus his eyes a little bit better, he sees 2 to 3 creatures standing in front of him. They had a whitish grayish skin. They had underdeveloped features, no hair, and large eyes. Aliens. He immediately went into self-defense mode and grabbed the nearest object to him, and he tried to break it to have something sharp to use for protection. But these creatures apparently, they didn't try to fight him in any way. They actually ran off. Travis as well, he leaves the room and he goes in the opposite direction from these creatures. And he goes down this long, dim lit hallway that leads him to a room that has a single chair in the middle with all these buttons and knobs. He's surrounded by stars, so he's assuming he's in space. He tries pressing these buttons, nothing happens. And that's when a man walks into the room. And this man, he looked human, but he had a helmet on, kind of like he was an astronaut. So Travis gets really excited that there's a human there. He's like, where am I? What's going on? What's happening? He's asking all these questions, and the man is not answering him, not even directly looking at him in the eye. He just grabs Travis's arm and he brings him to another room. This room was much larger. It had 2 other UFOs in it and 3 other human-like beings in the room. They sit him on a chair and Travis is like, they're here to save me. But what they do is they put a mask over his face, kind of like you're going into surgery. And the next thing he remembers is waking up on the pavement. Now, it's known that hypnosis can create false memories in people, but this doctor was a very skilled professional. The session was even taped and reviewed by psychologists and other researchers, and they all say that the entire session was properly conducted. After reviewing Travis's story about these alien-like creatures he saw, APRO mentions that the description Travis gave was pretty identical to a description that another person gave. And this person, it happened a few months earlier. They said that they were also abducted by aliens. They gave the same description about these creatures that were about 4 feet tall, no hair, large eyes, and nothing about that case had made it to any kind of media or the public. So how could Travis have known about the story if there was no way for him to even get a hold of that story? Many other scientific investigators came along after hearing about Travis's hypnosis session. One of them was Stanton Friedman, and he likes to be very thorough, and he doesn't just listen to a person's story for 2 minutes and say, well, that happened or that didn't happen. He likes to look at all the evidence and all the data. But Friedman actually goes to the site that this UFO incident on Travis had occurred, and he talked to everyone that was involved. He wasn't looking at this situation as black or white. He says there's a very big gray a box in the middle. He didn't want to immediately come to a conclusion. I mean, in any case, whether it's an abduction or a murder, you never want to just come to a conclusion based on your opinion. You want to follow the evidence. You want to look at the facts, because you can't call someone a criminal or a liar just based on your opinion or what you think. You need to do the research. You need to do the work. Cy Gilson, he was another experienced polygraph examiner, and he actually did the later test on the 6 crew members that said they were there when Travis was abducted by these extraterrestrial characters. I mean, even he was surprised that all these men had passed their polygraph exams. Next, it was expected for Travis to take one, but as we know, lie detectors, they test stress levels. And at this point, Travis was extremely stressed out. During this time period, PTSD wasn't as commonly used as it is today. The term was for war veterans. So post-traumatic stress disorder didn't even come to anyone's mind when they thought of what Travis had been through. But he was clearly suffering from this disorder. Travis and his brother, they later on do end up taking polygraph tests, and they pass. In Travis's documentary, he states, "What are we doing convicting suspected criminals and condemning them to death on less testimony than in this case where multiple people are passing a polygraph?" That's crazy. Now, there's more evidence to Travis's abduction than just these witnesses and their words. There is physical evidence. So many years later, in 2014, a field survey was conducted at the site where this UFO incident occurred, and researchers were there to analyze the tree growth in the area. Because if a UFO had been there, then radiation had to have affected the area in some way. So after observing this area, it's shown that the trees that surrounded the UFO in that circular shape, they were all producing wood fiber at 36 times the rate that they had in the last 85 years. Other trees in the area show the same changes, but at a much slower rate. And the farther you get away from this site, from the clearing, the less growth changes that you see. Not only was there a growing of the trees in this area, but only the sides of the trees that would have been facing the UFO showed a thickening in the growth rings. So studies show that this only happens when radiation occurs. And a UFO, it would produce a lot of radiation. This is so good. I literally want to drink the whole thing right now. Now, in the US alone, there are tens of thousands of unusual things happening in the sky. Now, they're not all UFOs, but it brings us to the question of, are we the only beings in our universe? Are we the only living creatures? Travis and others say that if there are 100 billion stars in the Milky Way alone, and there's about 10 planets per star, that's about 1,000 billion planets. So who's to say we are the only planet with living creatures on it? Travis also believes it's healthy to have skeptics out there and debunkers. A skeptic is someone who's just simply a non-believer, but a debunker, now, their job is to tear down someone's story. They don't want the public believing a single word these UFO believers are saying. While Joe Rogan in his podcast, he suggests that the government should, share more information with the public about what they know. Travis calmly argues that he doesn't think that would be the best idea, because the more that we know, the more our enemies would know. Aliens could be potentially used as weapons against other nations. I mean, if these creatures are thousands, maybe even millions of years more advanced than us, I'm sure they can create something more powerful than a nuclear bomb. Also, Travis says that in our world today, we already discriminate against people that are different than us, whether it's our skin color or our nationality. So who's to say that if we knew aliens existed and that they were able to walk among us, who's to say that they wouldn't be discriminated as well, if not even worse? Travis Walton truly believes that that night when he was struck by that beam of light, he believes that the aliens took him and abducted him to fix what they had accidentally done. And they wanted to fix him before he was returned back to Earth. So when he ends up telling this story to everyone, he's very passionate about the fact that he thinks they're not necessarily bad, and that we ultimately should not live in fear. He truly believes that they're not here to harm us, but maybe they're just curious. I mean, we're curious people, and maybe they're curious about us. If we didn't have any skeptics or debunkers out there in the world to tell us that you guys are crazy, aliens don't exist, then I believe the world would go into a complete frenzy. Does the government really know more about life out there on another planet? Are these debunkers there to, tell us something different, that this doesn't exist, but are they paid by the government to tell us that? And it's okay to disagree with all these questions, but I just thought they'd be fun to ask. Now it's been almost 46 years later, and Travis Walton, Mike Rogers, and the rest of the crew members, they all stick to their story. And they stick to their story despite family members not believing them and the public harassing them. They're literally not profiting from this in any way whatsoever. Some claim that this story was created because Mike and his crew were behind on their contract. But Mike Rogers says that a story of an abduction would not benefit them in any way when it comes to their work. If anything, it would have done more harm than good. This affected their careers, their dating lives, their personal lives. I mean, why continue this story if it continues to affect you in a negative way? And many years after this incident happened, people have come forward saying that on that night, they did see something in the sky and they saw that glowing light. But not everyone decided to go to the media about it. And most people that, believe they see a UFO or they see something unusual in the sky, they end up not reporting it. I mean, if you saw a UFO, would you report it? Or would you not want people to think you're crazy? So this is the most well-documented story about a UFO in our history. And if you want to learn more about other encounters that Travis has had in his life, I mean, some of the stories he tells are pretty interesting. I would advise you to listen to Joe Rogan's podcast, read the book. I haven't seen the movie because it's a little more dramatic than the real story, but the documentary is really good, and I'll make sure to leave that information below. This case makes you really think about how quick we are to judge people's stories before even hearing the evidence. So what do you guys think about, all these 7 people passing a polygraph with the same questions being answered? Or what do you think about the tree growth in the area? Or the people that eventually came forward saying that they as well saw something that night? So interesting. So I loved talking about that case. I'm not a huge sci-fi kind of person. I mean, it's interesting. I thought about talking about this case, and then I watched the new season of American Horror Story, and it was about aliens. And I was like, this is a sign. I have to learn as much about it. I have to talk about it. So American Horror Story, thank you. You gave me the sign to tell this story. Thank you guys for watching. If you make this drink, let me know. It's really good, and I really appreciate you coming by. Make sure to subscribe, give a thumbs up, leave a comment, follow me on Instagram, and I'm really glad you guys were here for this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Whether you're a believer or non-believer, I think it was a fun story to listen to. I will see you next time. Well, I won't see you. I actually hate when YouTubers say that. I will talk to you guys next time. Have a good day. Be safe. Be aware of your surroundings. All that safe stuff. Cheers.